Alright, welcome back. Here we are with my next wargaming project. This is Saratoga, the turning point of the American Revolution, specifically the Battle of Freeman's Farm, fought on September 19th, 1777, though the game also comes with a separate next day scenario. This is volume 1 of the Battles of the American Revolution series, designed by Mark Miklos and published by GMT Games. It came out in '98 and was reprinted in '06. The second printing is the version that you see here, set up and ready to go. Like a good wargamer, I did manage to print out the living series rulebook. This is version September 2015, and we'll be focusing mostly, if not entirely, on the basic rules for this solo learning game, and I'll also be trying out these solitaire tactics tables, solitaire variant designed by Joel Toppin, which first appeared in the C3I magazine issue number 22, so I'll be using this when determining which tactics chits to use for each side when resolving close combat. So let's take a closer look at the map and the components, and I'll try to give you a gist of the rules as I understand them before I get started with turn 1 of the playthrough, so come on down. So the Americans start out set up over on Bemis Heights, the high ground just west of the Hudson, also blocking passage via River Road down to Albany. Here is the southern friendly map edge. We have Gates and his wing in dark blue, as well as Arnold and his wing in light blue, with Morgan, who's considered a dummy leader, set up out here just south of the Freeman's Farm objective area, just off camera. Each hex represents a distance of 200 yards across, each turn about an hour of real time. Each non-artillery SP, about 100 men, each artillery SP, 2 cannons, and we have the turn track up here with British reinforcements set up on turns 2 and 3. We start on the 8 a.m. turn and play through the 7 p.m. turn, 12 turns, or until an automatic victory is triggered. Again, we're dealing with a lot of forest terrain, totally unintentional. Nicely depicted forest terrain with cute little trees on them. We have clear terrain and on occasion marsh and crop hexes. And quite a variety of different hex side terrain as well. So we have, and I'll zoom in on all of this probably during the playthrough, creek hex sides, we have upslope hex sides, a combination of the two, which would be the creek / upslope. We have ravine hex sides, and we have bridges and fords. Again, here's the river, here's the road, and these are the tracks. We even have destroyed bridges, and some other things that have more to do with the gameplay, like this gray dashed line which outlines the cluster of 10 hexes that represents the Freeman's Farm objective area. We have hexes with these dots that show you the Bemis Heights line. We have hexes with stars, 2 with these red stars here and here, showing you where the British victory hexes are, Fort Nielsen and Bemis Tavern, as well as one with the blue star for the American victory hex. And, more hex side terrain, earthworks and fieldworks. And finally, these hexes with little garrison symbols on them. So let's take a closer look at these counters. So here's a look at the British setup over on the other side of the map. That way is north. They begin temporarily overstacked in the forest along the track just off the river road by their friendly map edge. We have Burgoyne here and Fraser here. I'll go ahead and spread out this giant stack that begins under Fraser's command so we can take a look at the different unit types and various stats printed on the counters. So the units with the red color band are the British regulars, the Germans are in green, and in brown we have the auxiliaries and militia. Let's zoom in on this guy. This is the 24th Regiment, which begins in hex 1629 as printed on the counter. We have various stats down below. The number in the lower left is the unit's combat strength. Next to that, its movement allowance, and above that, the +1 is the unit's base morale rating, which is combined with the Army morale rating tracked above. This is a 2-step unit. Unlike, say, the Rangers, it's a 1-step unit. And some units have additional information printed on their counter. For example, the Jaegers have this white R and a black circle, which means that it is a rifle unit permitted to fire across greater distances than those armed solely with muskets, permitted to fire during the rifle fire phase, and have some different die roll modifiers to come into play during the close combat phase, different requirements as well. And there are 2 different rifle types in the system, only one of which is in this module, the white R and the black circle, as opposed to the black R and the white circle, which basically means that in this case, the rifle units always suffer any adverse combat die roll modifiers when resolving close combat. This unit also has an LT printed down below, as does the Rangers, which means that these are light infantry units. So this has bearing on when resolving any artillery or rifle fire directed at the unit in the form of a beneficial die roll modifier for the defending unit. It also comes into play when resolving movement, specifically determining the movement point cost to enter across certain types of terrain, or whether certain terrain types are prohibited. So we can take a look at the terrain effects chart, which is printed on the player aid card. There are 2 of these. They're double-sided. There's a lot of information on them. I'm sure we'll take a look at during the playthrough, but you could see the various terrain types and terrain hex sides, and a column for each unit type: infantry, light infantry, dragoon, artillery, and leaders. So marshes, for example, are prohibited to all units, whereas ravine hex sides are prohibited only to dragoon and artillery units. Dragoons are, well, let me see if I can find an example. Here we go. This is the Connecticut Light Dragoon, so the CN instead of a CT printed, a misprint. 260 morale rating, 1-step unit. So for this unit, we would be looking here. When resolving movement, there's also a section here for attacker modifiers for fire and combat. And just quickly, I'll go ahead and show you now, before I forget, various other tables. On this side, we have the rifle and artillery fire to hit tables, and the damage tables for each, army morale adjustment. And on the other side here, we have the close combat table with the DRMs list, tactical matrix, leader casualty summary, victory points schedule, various combat results, etc. So, yes, leaders. So here we have, okay, infantry, light infantry, and artillery. So 1-step artillery, 2-step artillery, and this militia. These are all 1-step. I haven't looked at these closely yet. And leaders. Let's look at these starting British leaders. So we have their rank and number of stars printed along the side in the black band, and several stats printed along the bottom from left to right. The leaders, close combat DRM, leadership DRM, and movement allowance. The leadership die roll modifier affects any morale checks and rally attempts made by combat units under the leader's command. And lastly, before we look at the sequence of play, I wanted to mention the stacking limit, which is in effect at all times except when first placing reinforcements on the board, I believe. Anyway, the limit is 6 SPs plus 1 artillery unit, regardless of the number of SPs the artillery unit has, plus any leaders. So, for example, we can stack this artillery unit. Let's see here. 1 SP, another 4, and just to mix it up, another 1, and here's a full stack, for example. And as long as units are in parade order, which basically means not disrupted or shattered, it exerts a zone of control in the 6 surrounding hexes, except not across creek hex sites or into forest or fieldworks. So not here. Into here, not here, for example. Here's some marsh terrain, which is prohibited to all units from entering. And I have a few other notes here. Enemy zones of control are rigid but not locking. You must stop, you may exit. And they are active for purposes of close combat to all units except rifle and artillery. Friendly units do not negate enemy zones of control, for example, when retreating, except for one condition, when negating the surrounded die roll modifier during close combat for defender surrounded or attacker surrounded. And is there anything else? You are always allowed to move at least 1 hex, even if you don't have the movement allowance to do so, as long as it's not prohibited terrain. There is strategic movement, which doubles your movement allowance along roads or tracks, as long as you're never adjacent to enemy units. Terrain effects are cumulative, except for combined terrain hex sites. They have their own row on the TEC. And I think we're about ready to take a look at that sequence of play. So here's a look at the sequence of play. We have the initiative segment, then the initiative player turn, followed by the second player turn, and finally the end of turn segment, which is over on the other column. Generally speaking, during each player turn, we first resolve movement, then the rally phase, followed by a defensive artillery fire phase, then the rifle fire phase, and finally close combat. During the initiative segment, both players roll a d10 and add to that their Army Morale die roll modifier for initiative, which is based on this Army Morale track, where both players begin with an Army Morale of 14, or high morale, giving them a +1 to their initiative die rolls, and their unit morale is at normal or unmodified. From 5 to 10, the Army's fatigued, initiative gets +0, unit morale -1. From 1 to 4, they're wavering, -1, -2 respectively, not 0, the Army is demoralized. The player with the higher initiative die roll result gets to go first as the initiative player, and if there's a tie, you simply re-roll until the tie is broken. The initiative player then gets to resolve any movement, followed by the rally phase. This is when the phasing player gets to attempt to rally any disrupted or shattered units that are not adjacent to enemy combat units. You do this by conducting a morale check for each unit that you're attempting to rally by rolling again a d10 and adding to that the unit's modified morale, which is the base morale is printed on the counter, modified by the Army morale die roll modifier based on the current Army morale. And if there's a leader in the hex, then you add his leadership die roll modifier to that result as well. And on a 5+, it's a success. And after that comes the defensive artillery fire phase. The defensive artillery fire phase is when the non-phasing player gets to fire their artillery, and they must select a target combat unit that is within range, which in this game is 3 hexes, and when firing at a target 2 or 3 hexes away, they must also be able to see it. In this scenario, the only blocking terrain is forest, but there's a lot of forest. In addition, any intervening units, friendly or enemy, also block line of sight. You may fire into, but not through, such obstacles unless both units are upslope. And here's also a helpful diagram to show you some of the other nuances of dealing with line of sight and sloping terrain. After this comes the rifle fire phase. During the rifle fire phase, both players may fire their rifle units, and the targets must be adjacent combat units, and the phasing player chooses their targets first. Rifle fire is considered to be simultaneous. Results, including army morale adjustments, are applied at the same time after both sides have fired. The non-phasing player must execute any retreats before the phasing player. I just went ahead and read that straight out of the rulebook. After this comes the close combat phase. During the close combat phase, the phasing player, which is the attacker, must conduct close combat with all friendly combat units except artillery units that are adjacent to enemy units, and all enemy units that are adjacent to friendly units must be attacked. Rifle units are never required to attack, and artillery units, SPs, never count towards close combat. If the only defending units are artillery, they are captured. And there's a captured units box off of the map, and those are simply removed from the game and count towards the opponent's victory points at the end. There are some multi-hex combat restrictions. Attacking units stacked in a single hex may combine in a single attack or attack different units. However, all defending units in a single hex must be attacked together in a single close combat. And this one's a bit different. Each close combat must involve either one attacking hex or one defending hex only. And you basically begin by having the phasing player designate attacks. They announce all close combats before resolving any of them up front, and at the same time designate which friendly units are attacking which enemy units. Then you basically determine the odds ratio. Here's a look at the close combat table, ranging from 1 to 3 to 4 to 1 odds. If all defending units are parade order cavalry and no attacking units are cavalry, then the defender at this time has the option to announce a cavalry withdrawal, which means that they retreat their mounted cavalry 3 hexes to a hex not adjacent to an enemy unit, and then you skip straight to the advance after combat step. Units that are marked with this may not move or attack. However, they still defend normally and retain their zone of control. There's some other details that, of course, as usual, I'm glossing over. And these markers are removed automatically from friendly units during the owning player's next rally phase, which again comes after the movement phase. So we've determined our odds ratio. Next, we determine lead units, starting with the attacker. This unit must be a parade order unit if one is available. Artillery units may not be chosen, and that unit's modified morale will be used as the DRM for the close combat. And if there are any adverse combat results, except capture results, then this lead unit will be the first unit to absorb the result. And if possible, you must choose a unit that would be able to advance after combat if necessary. So units cannot be chosen as lead units if they would be required to advance after combat into prohibited terrain. Then you determine all the DRMs before rolling the die, and there's a close combat DRM chart. You can see part of it over here. And because we have rifle units with the white R and the black circle, they will suffer adverse DRMs in this scenario. And you, at this point, select and resolve tactics. And I'm going to skip over this, talk about it a bit later. But basically, you find out if there are additional DRMs or if there's no combat after all. Then you resolve the combat. I won't be using any of the advanced and optional rules for this learning game. You apply the combat results, and then you have the option to advance after combat. Here's a look at the tactical matrix, along with a set of 8 tactics chits that each player begins with, including skirmish, attack echelon, stand fast, withdraw, frontal assault, commit reserve, turn flank, and refuse flank. During the select and resolve tactics step of close combat, each side secretly chooses one of their eligible tactics chits and reveals them simultaneously, cross-referencing the tactics matrix to determine if there are any DRMs, finding the attacker's column and defender's row. And you'll notice there's some requirements for these, such as requiring a leader or a leader and an open flank. To play turn flank or refuse flank, there must be 1 empty hex adjacent to both players' units, 1 hex with defending units in it, and 1 hex with attacking units in it, and a friendly leader must be stacked with or adjacent to at least 1 unit involved in the close combat. The NC result means that no combat takes place. If a side played a withdraw chit and the result is an NC, then the side playing the withdraw chit must retreat all units 1 hex. Exception: artillery in the attacker stack never retreats. And if both sides chose withdraw, then the defender retreats first and you skip to the advance after combat step. You might recall that I mentioned I would be using this solitaire tactics tables variant. So you roll, you find your table based on the situation, roll either a d6, d8, or d10 to determine what tactics the side will use. So we'll see how that works out. Now let's take a look at the various combat results, both for fire and close combat. We have a dash for no effect, AM for army morale loss, retreat, disruption, 1-step loss, 2-step loss, captured, defender's choice, captured, attacker's choice, pinned, leader casualty, and again, I don't think I'll be using any advanced rules for this learning game, including momentum. So, army morale loss means the affected player reduces their army morale by 1. Retreat means the owning player retreats the affected unit 1 hex. And if both sides must retreat, which is possible on the R/R result, the defender retreats first. On a disruption result, the owning player retreats the affected unit 3 hexes and places a disruption marker on the unit. Looks like this. And that's pretty bad. Any disrupted units may only move 1 hex per turn and may not move adjacent to an enemy unit. If they begin a movement phase adjacent to an enemy unit, they must use their 1 hex movement to move away from as many enemy units as possible, so they're no longer adjacent to them. They may not attack, and disrupted artillery and rifle units may not fire. Disrupted units defend with only half of their SPs rounded up, have no zone of control, and if they receive an additional D result, they're considered to be shattered, which I'll describe here in a bit. And if they receive a pin result, they're captured. And if they end their own close combat phase adjacent to enemy units and are not stacked with friendly parade order units, then they suffer an additional D result, which means that they become shattered, i.e. they must retreat 3 hexes or be captured. 1-step loss and 2-step loss is pretty straightforward. For 2-step loss result, the affected unit is eliminated and placed in the eliminated box. If the affected unit is only a 1-step unit or was a reduced 2-step unit, a second unit must take a step loss. If there are no other units in the hex, then that second step loss is ignored. And for these last 4 that I mentioned, in addition to all that, you if there are other friendly units in the close combat, and or any defender artillery, then for each such unit you must make a morale check, and if they fail they must retreat 1 hex as well. Next we are going to look up here, the DCAC pinned. Basically, on a DC or AC, one combat unit is captured. That unit does not have to be the lead unit, nor does it have to be at full strength. It's either the defender's choice or attacker's choice which unit that is. And for both of those, you make a similar morale check. However, if you fail, if you succeed, then you retreat 1 hex. If you fail, you suffer a D result, retreating 3 hexes and becoming disrupted. And the pinned result. This one means that the opposing units remain engaged. All disrupted and shattered units on both sides are captured. The defender, followed by the attacker, then places his or her units in the captured box and adjusts army morale. The pinned marker is then placed on all hexes involved in this close combat, which looks like this. And the next phasing player must either A, attack all units marked as pinned and attack all defending units marked as pinned during their player turn. Additional units may stack and or attack with the pinned units, or B, move all friendly pinned units so they are not adjacent to any enemy units, and do not move any other friendly units adjacent to enemy pinned units, and reduce his or her army morale by 1. 1 army morale point would be spent for each individual pin result that is removed in this way. And in case B, a leader cannot leave a pin hex without triggering an army morale penalty. Pinned defending units may not receive a diversion, which is an advanced rule that I have decided I won't be using. So that's more involved. I'll deal with that slowly, especially when we come across it for the first time during the learning game. And if any of these results have an asterisk, you resolve the leader casualty result. The modified die roll must equal this number exactly. The result. The owning player removes 1 leader and places it in the eliminated box. The leader chosen need not be the one in command. And this is the only result from artillery or rifle fire that may affect other units in the hex. If no leader is present, ignore both the result and the army morale adjustment due to leader casualty. And there's a little leader casualty summary here that tells you exactly how it affects army morale and victory points. Going back, if a unit becomes shattered, here's the marker for that. What does this mean? Horrible things. Shattered units may not move, may not attack. Shattered artillery and rifle units may not fire. They defend with 1 SP regardless of their actual SP ratings and may not receive any terrain DRMs. They have no zone of control and are eliminated if they receive an additional D result. And if they receive a pin result, they're captured. And if they end any close combat phase adjacent to enemy units and are not stacked with parade order units, they're captured. All right. There are various special rules for the scenario, of course, as you'll hopefully see over the course of the playthrough, a page and a half or so, along with a couple of interesting looking variants. Gates prevails and Arnold prevails, in addition to the whole next day scenario that I referred to earlier. But I'm going to save all that for later and finish here by talking briefly about how to win. So the British player can achieve a decisive victory if at least one of their parade order non-artillery combat units occupies either one of their 2 victory hexes, again, either Vimus Tavern or Fort Nielsen, without the presence of enemy zones of control in the hex at the end of any game turn. Artillery units cannot control a hex. Starting on game turn 6, the 1 p.m. turn, the American player can achieve a decisive victory in a similar fashion if at least one of their parade order combat units occupies their victory hex, which is hex 2019 as shown earlier, without the presence of an EZOC in the hex at the end of a game turn. If an army's morale falls to 0, it's considered to be demoralized. The game ends immediately and the opposing player wins a substantial victory. Otherwise, you play through to the end of the game, game turn 12, tally up your score based on this victory point schedule as shown on the player aid card. If the British have more VPs than the Americans, they are awarded a marginal victory, otherwise the game is an American marginal victory. You get points for eliminated, reduced, captured, and shattered enemy units, and leaders. And you get a point for Freeman's Farm, the Freeman's Farm objective area. That's the 10 hex area around Freeman's Farm. There are different conditions for each side. The British player receives a point if there is a British non-artillery combat unit in Freeman's Farm itself, hex 1015, and there are no American combat units or zones of control in any hex of the objective area. And the American player receives a point if there are American combat units in at least 2 adjacent hexes of the Freeman's Farm objective area. And in that case, the presence of British units and or zones of control have no effect on this VP determination. And then the British get a point per American garrison hex abandoned. So that ends my intro. Hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully it won't take me too long to get around to posting the playthrough portion. Thanks for watching.